I'm the perfect. I'm the engagement analyst at the To&Through project, and I will be your host for today's presentation. Today, we're going to be diving into a report called Connected Community, Reframing Community Partnerships Around College Success at Enlace Chicago. The report was written in partnership between us at To&Through and Enlace Chicago. It highlights Enlace's La Villita Education Collaborative, which centers on leveraging community strengths to increase college access and success for students from La Villita. It's been an honor to work with Astrid Suarez and Jessica Cañas to learn more about their past work with LVIC, and it has been truly inspiring to work with Enlace Chicago's Valerie Kaufman to learn more about the future of education work at Enlace, which we're going to hear about more today. I also wanted to offer a special thank you to the Square One Foundation for making this report and thus this presentation possible. So before we jump into the report, I wanted to go over some logistics on the game plan for today. So we're going to start off with welcoming our presenters, do a little community reflection in the chat, and then I'm going to pass it off to Valerie to do an overview of Enlace and La Villita Education Collaborative. That'll offer us a foundation to dive into the report. And then we're going to share a preview after learning about the report of what's happening now at Enlace and the To&Through project around family engagement. And then we're going to wrap up with a really fun Q&A. I'm inviting everyone, if you want to submit questions, to use the feature down below to submit a question. We can't promise we'll get to all of them, but we will try to get to a couple towards the end of the presentation. And then we're going to transition to another Zoom room to talk more. And this session is the optional meeting afterwards is optional, but there we're going to be reflecting in community about, what this report means to our work and our practices in the field. And so that's happening right afterwards at 1 o'clock. And so we hope to see folks there. And so with that, let me introduce our guest. So first we have Valerie Kaufman. Valerie is the Director of Education at Enlace Chicago and began working at Enlace in 2019 when she was hired as an adult and early childhood education pipeline specialist. As director, she's focused on developing internal structures and processes that strengthen and support the entire educational pipeline. Valerie is working to integrate the Little Village Education Collaborative initiatives and priorities into the wider education department programs that will reinforce service delivery for Little Village students and their families. And our other presenter today is Jenny Nagaoka. Jenny is the Deputy Director of the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research, where she has conducted research for the past 15 years. Nagaoka's research interests focus on policy and practice in urban education reform, particularly developing school environments and instructional practices that promote college readiness and success. And so with that, since we're talking all about community today, we are going to start this session with a little reflecting in community in the chat. So the chat should be activated. And I'm going to ask folks to answer the question, what are some of the strengths and assets in your students' communities that support their post-secondary success? Thank you, Ritza, for putting the question in the chat. Okay, Priscilla said parent engagement. Okay, Tanya says mentorship. Emily says opportunities for learning outside the classroom, that community learning outside the classroom walls. Leah says access to cultural institutions to explore what careers can look like, music, art, parks, museums, all the free days. Yes, those are truly hidden gems in the city. When I think of my neighborhood, I think a lot of I guess how information is shared. Like if one opportunity is shared with one person, it travels fast, fairly. Dom says connections with my neighbors, creates opportunities to talk about and share information that I have. Cool, cool, cool. Well, that's a great place to end. Thank you all for sharing your reflections in the chat. Oh, one more. Hillary says libraries. Yes, there's great programming at libraries too. Well, I always forget to check out their event pages. Yes, +1. Okay, so thank you all for reflecting community with me. I'm gonna now pass it off to Valerie to learn more about La Vida.
Thank you, Jessica. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Glad to be with you. Valerie Kaufman, Director of Education at Enlace. I've been at Enlace a little bit more than 5 years, and I think what I'm most grateful for is that I've had the opportunity to experience my community in a way that I didn't really have before. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, I'm born and raised in Little Village. And so this mural that you see here is literally down the street from my house. But it really is a call to culture in our community. And so there's a little, some demographics about La Villita. We're located on the southwest side of the city of Chicago. We border North Lawndale. We are bordered by I-55, and we come up against the railroad tracks close to Cicero. One of the things that has happened over the course of, my time here at Enlace is that we have experienced an incredible amount of transition in the community. So we're seeing neighbors from North and South Lawndale move into, neighbors from North Lawndale moving into South Lawndale and vice versa. Families, unfortunately, being pushed from Little Village into Cicero as a result of gentrification. And so as we think about the work of education, it's really pushing us to think about how we meet this moment in a way that is inclusive of everyone in Little Village. Historically, La Villita is the main port of entry for Mexican immigrant families. Over the last 2.5 years, we received a number of new families from Central and South America. Many of those families have stayed in our community and are now permanent neighbors. And so we've had to meet that moment too as we think about long-term educational attainment, workforce development, and building bridges to ease some historical tensions that have existed. Next slide, please. And you can click one more time. Awesome. So this is a little bit about Enlace. We just got done formalizing our third iteration of a quality of life plan for Little Village. Enlace was the convener of that plan. But Enlace as an institution, as a community-based organization, we focus on 4 pillars in the community. Recognizing that the 4 of these pillars are very intersectional. Education, of course, community health, community safety, and immigration. And I think in light of our new administration, the intersectionality of all these pieces has really just been broadcast in bright lights across the community. When we think about, advocacy, one of the things that we are really trying to be intentional about is acknowledging that intersectionality. And when we go to advocate, making sure that we have all of the right stakeholders joining us. As an organization, we work alongside the community, but we are ultimately beholden to them. And so what more powerful way to advocate than by ensuring that we have community stakeholders at the table when we're going down to Springfield. We are one of the largest CBOs in Little Village, and that comes with a lot of responsibility when we think about what does partnership and collaboration look like? How can we collectively best meet the needs of our students? And in the context of today's conversation, thinking about college access, post-secondary pathways, educational attainment, it's become even more imperative that we leverage resources, but also other community-based organizations' talents and experience as well. Next slide, please. So, um, a little bit about I got a little backed up there. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Little Village Education Collaborative. My fault, that is not your fault. The Little Village Education Collaborative was born out of the second iteration of the Little Village Quality of Life Plan. And that collaborative was really charged with implementing the goals and strategies of the Quality of Life Plan. And again, we recognize this is not a charge that Enlace by ourselves can really undertake. Instead, we really needed to bring all stakeholders to the table, all partners, to really think collectively about, we have these big ideas, big goals. How do we begin to move the needle in the right direction? And so the Education Collaborative is formally had 4 working tables that covered the entire educational pipeline. So early childhood education, K-8, high school, post-secondary, and adult education. And I say formally, we'll talk a little bit more about where we are today, but we are currently in the process of reactivating and re-engaging our partners through the collaborative. We previously convened stakeholders to address access and awareness to early childhood programs, from childcare to prenatal care, home visiting, and then thinking about our high school, post-secondary, bringing together 2- and 4-year institutions to really think about the needs of Little Village students in an asset-based approach, and really removing barriers so that our students are more ready to thrive in these types of institutions. Next slide, please. Oh, I think they got mixed up. There we go. Okay. So as I mentioned, we just got done with the our last year. We launched the 2024 Little Village Quality of Life Plan, and this is a picture of the launch of that event. And so as you can see here, there is such a diverse group of stakeholders, local elected officials, Enlace staff, community-based partners, but most importantly, what you're going to see front and center in this picture are students and our young people in the community. This quality of life plan is for them. And so we were able, through the planning process and development of this plan, to really elevate student and young people, youth voice, in thinking about what are the things that they want to see in all pillars of this quality of life plan. The other thing that makes this plan different is that an evaluation has been embedded in it. How do we measure success? What does that look like? And ensuring that as community providers and community-based organizations, that we are truly accountable to our community. Some goals out of this new plan, remain the same: improving early childhood quality and access. Some of them are a little different when we think about strengthening learning through collaboration and shared resources. Again, meeting the moment. We were able to do that and shift as a result of the pandemic, and hoping to be able to meet the current moment in our current political climate. But I will be back to talk a little bit more about where we are now a little later. For now, I will pass it over to Jenny.
Great, thanks so much, Valerie. And as Valerie said, it's like I'll be talking. So I'll just try to give you a little bit of background, but I also want to acknowledge my co-authors on this report, Don McCoy, Alex Escher, and Jessica Vargas. So this is work that we started prior to the pandemic, and it really focuses kind of at the slice of time about what was happening in Enlace, in the Little Village Education Collaborative, roughly between 2015 to 2022. But that's building off of a lot of work that was happening in Enlace and a lot of the connections and values that they hold. And I think you'll hear a lot of through lines of what Valerie just talked about, and how she is carrying on a lot of this work in the current day. And at the time that we're focused on, the work was being led by Jessica Cañas and Astrid Fares, but I think it's really, we're excited to see how this work has evolved and is in the good hands of Valerie. Sorry, next slide. So just to kind of contextualize about how we started to enter into this work. I mean, you've heard a lot from To&Through and others about some of the remarkable changes that have happened in the Chicago public schools, around college enrollment, so that, kind of going back to 2008, when a lot of this work was just getting started in CPS, a little over half of students were going on to college. And then we kind of flash forward another 10 years later, where over 60% of students were enrolling in college immediately after graduating from high school. But a lot, when you see this kind of numbers, a lot of the question becomes like, how did this happen? I think a lot of that has been well documented, but actually moving forward to the next slide, we also see pockets where the patterns are similar in some ways to what we saw across the entire district, but actually are even the increases that we've seen are even higher. So when we look more closely at the changes that were happening in Little Village, back in 2008, 38% of high school graduates were immediately enrolling in college. And then we moved to 2019, that number has moved up to 61%. So it's like in the early years, Little Village students who lived in Little Village were going at rates that were lower than the CPS average, and then it went to where they were actually about the same as the rest of the district. And I think this is something that's really is important, not just because it's good to see numbers increase, but when we think about what the impact is for the students who are growing up in Little Village. So what we see here is that about going back to 2008, fewer than 200 students were immediately enrolling in college, and that number had gone up to 547 in 2019. So it more than doubled in that time period. And we also saw the number of students who were completing college from that class quadrupling from 94% to 396%. So a lot of the question here is so what was happening in Little Village, and how can we start to think about what others can learn from it? So we started this work. Next slide, please. We really wanted to be able to understand this a little bit better. And one of the core parts that we think is around this change that we are seeing in Little Village was the work that was happening around Enlace's College Pipeline Initiative, which is a piece of the Little Village Education Collaborative. And it was this really different story about how to be working on college access. CPS, and we live in a rich environment inside of CPS and college access organizations, and really providing a strong set of supports. But what we saw happening inside of Enlace was a little bit different. It was really a different way of engaging with families and communities that we think is a really important part of how we can actually strengthen the ecosystem around post-secondary supports. And we wanted to be able to document this and see what others could potentially learn from what was happening inside of Enlace. Next slide, please. So, with the support of the Square Around Foundation, we launched this project a little bit before the collaborative, and we really, what we really wanted to do was we wanted to document this, but we wanted to be making sure that we were telling the story to the eyes and voices of the people inside of Enlace and their partners inside and outside of Little Village. And so we interviewed, so we talked to people. We initially met with staff members from Enlace, but then we started to talk to their partners and other people who've worked around the College Pipeline Initiative. And so we did over 25 interviews. We also talked to parents and students around their experiences around the College Pipeline Initiative. And we really were trying to, on the next slide, please. And through that, we were trying to actually distill, what is it that happened? What are the big pillars that really helped to drive all of this work? So starting out, a really important component was how how the College Pipeline Initiative was really centering and trusting families. Secondly, aligning supports across systems and transitions. And finally, really doing a lot with leading the work with data and research. And I think you'll also see a lot of through lines through this and also through other work that's happening throughout Enlace. And so I'll start talking about the first pillar around centering and trusting families. A lot of the work that we were learning about around accessing college centered around this cultural, community cultural wealth framework, which is developed by Tara Yasso. And I always mention that this is part of this work, which is also something that is sort of infused throughout the work inside of Enlace. And this cultural wealth, I think it's a really powerful thing, and a lot of you are probably familiar with it, but it's trying to change the paradigm with how we're thinking about working with people and how we think about the assets that people are bringing them. I think a lot of times with partnerships or work like college access, we see the students and their families as people who are receiving support from us, as opposed to seeing them as bringing assets that really can help drive the change we're having, both in understanding what is going on, but also being actors in this process of change. And so he also talks about 6 different forms of cultural wealth and different types of capital. So first, aspirational capital, which is trying to derive support, but it's knowing that within students and their families and their communities, they have dreams and aspirations about what they would like to have happen in the future, even though quite often they're facing a lot of different types of challenges. Secondly, pulling from the linguistic capital that students have. Not seeing the fact that students may be learning English as a second language, not as something that is a challenge to overcome, but really seeing that as an asset and understanding that this provides them a different lens on which to view the world. It makes them more flexible in their thinking, and that the cultural understanding that they bring with that is something that is actually valuable in working with them to work toward going to college. The third piece is familial capital, and I think one thing I should mention is I think it was really I really appreciated hearing from all of you with that initial question, because I think you'll hear with how you were talking about the assets that you see in the communities that you're working with are also reflected in this idea of community cultural wealth, and how this is a piece of what students, families, and communities bring with them that we actually don't tap into nearly much as we should be in the work that we're doing. And so familial capital is like recognizing that, whether they're families or the larger kinship networks that people have, is that with that is bringing a lot of knowledge, skills, practices that really can help us in supporting students. Next is social capital, and this is thinking about the relationships and connections that exist inside of communities, and that this is truly a resource for sharing information, for advocating for students and change in different ways. And then there's navigational capital, which is recognizing that students and their families have developed the ability to navigate complex social institutions and systems. And quite often they are having to do this and do this in ways that are more challenging to other people, because the systems were not designed with them in mind. And then relatedly is resistance capital. And this is thinking about how students and their families, it's not just that they are able to navigate them, but they've also developed knowledge and skills and experiences that have helped them persevere through systems that were not designed for them, but also to resist some of what they are facing over time. And I think, sorry, going back real quickly. And so kind of going through this, I think it's something that has really grounded a lot of the work about what I'm going to be talking about, and also the work across Enlace. Okay, next slide. And so the piece of the work that really kind of that we think sort of really epitomizes how this community cultural wealth framework was brought to life was the Parent Leaders for College. And so I think one of the differences with the approach that the Parent Leaders for College initiative did is that they didn't see parents like, oh, they need to learn how to do these do things like, knowing how do you fill out a college application, how do you fill out a FAFSA, and seeing this sort of as a task oriented way of reaching out to parents, but really trying to think, how do you help parents understand the larger context of the higher education system? How do you help them understand more of the nuances of it? How do you help parents be part of the agents of change, to really helping schools, colleges, college access systems, access organizations really understand this? And this becomes particularly important in a community like Little Village, where a lot of parents were not educated in the US. And so because they don't have that experience, they don't know it, but it doesn't mean that they're not really interested and able to really kind of understand the education system here in the US a little bit better, and to really, and with that knowledge, being able to do a lot more with navigating it, understanding how to make the systems work more effectively for them, and also seeing how the best way to really spread knowledge and to help it, maybe not just taking care of the students in front of them, but really making the knowledge and understanding about how to navigate the college system, is to have parents be talking to their neighbors and friends and other people in the communities, because that's where they are the most trusted sources for information inside of the community. And part of what also Parent Leaders for College did, and Valerie referenced this, is work that continues to go on inside of Enlace, is making parents be part of the people who are going into these meetings with higher education leaders, or going down to Springfield to lobby, because the people who are most effective in voicing what's happening and the most convincing are the people who are actually being most deeply affected by things. Next slide. The next big principle was around aligning process reports across systems and transitions. And a lot of this is kind of this idea of collective impact, and that any one organization or institution is not nearly as effective as actually as using the collective influence and resources of different organizations. And so this is something that Enlace does a lot. They serve as a convener and bridger. Quite often, this is sort of was referred to as the mesas de trabajos, the working tables. And so because Enlace has deep roots in the community and there's a lot of trust there, they're really able to bring together big people in different organizations that would not necessarily normally be speaking to each other. So this was a big role of the work that was happening. They were also bringing parents into this. And a lot of this work of trying to align supports really coalesced around two different initiatives. One was counselor cafes. And so this was an opportunity for elementary and high school counselors to come together to really better understand students across that transition. But a lot of the discussions around the needs and about what students really needed from counselors was coming from parents who are part of that parent university. And then the other big table was around high school and post-secondary. And here it was bringing together high school practitioners and local college access staff. And similarly, the agenda there was obviously this was the practitioners and college access organization, people coming together to work on these problems and share information and knowledge and support each other. But the understanding of what about what the challenges were and where effort should be focused was coming from the parents inside of the community. So the efforts were really centered not just more generally about what students need, but what students inside of Little Village needed specifically. And so that there's really a much more targeted use of that time. And then the third pillar, and this is obviously very much in alignment with To&Through, was leading with data and research. And a lot of our work, we talked so much about how data is a powerful tool to really shed light on what's happening, to communicate, building a common understanding, and focusing efforts. But a lot of times, the way data is used is that it can be coming from a deficit lens, or it's really being framed from outside of the perspective of people inside of the community. One of the things that Elvic did was to be not having data that was explaining from somebody outside of the community about what was happening, but using data as an opportunity to be interpreting what that data meant and to be telling the story of what was happening inside of the Little Village from the perspective of people inside of Little Village, and to really be able to advocate for the students there. And this kind of also, and I think it's also kind of coalesced in the report that I'm showing you here, which also drew from the To&Through tool to really be able to do that. And then in terms of ongoing work, data is used with schools to develop strategies based on the data on what's happening inside of Little Village. And it's and I think part of the idea of the approach with using data is that it's there to develop strategies. We're not there to show the ways in which Little Village students are not performing as we'd want, but it really is a way of understanding what's happening and to develop strategies that are really important. I think one of the other pieces of how data was used here that's is different than quite often what happens, is that data was giving entree into different places, and when people have data, they're seen as being more credible, and so this sort of transformed from data that was about students in Little Village to a place where Enlace was able to be telling their story in their own words, and to really change the perspective of the people that they are working with. And I think the quote here sort of it shows some of how the perspective and how the lens on which students inside of Little Village was shifting. Yeah, next slide, please. And sorry, I apologize. I'm recovering from a cold. And so there are a number of key lessons that we feel like came from this. I mean, first, you kind of see with the approach of the parent university and how they took that to the tables that were being convened, is that efforts like this are most effective when you're starting with the people who really understand the context that's happening and understand the values and hopes of what students and people inside the community really want. Next, is that this is not work that anyone can do alone. It's like schools can't do this alone, college access organizations can't do this alone, and this becomes much more powerful when it also is bringing in people inside of the community and having somebody who can, in the collective action framework, help bridge that, convene people, get people moving collectively in the same direction. The next one is like, how much of this is grounded in relationships and trust? I mean, I talked a little bit about the trust of Enlace, but I also want to emphasize, like, when we are talking to different stakeholders who had worked with the Little Village Education Collaborative, how much they talked about how strong their relationship was and how much they trusted Jessica and Astrid. And I think that's part of all the way of how like Valerie is continuing this work about how much of this is really about relationships and trust. And then finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up. This is how important data is. I mean, data tells us where we are and where we want to go. And it's a way of building credibility and creating a common understanding about what is happening inside of a community or inside of a school. The next slide, please. And finally, I just kind of want to, before I turn it back over to Valerie, is it just kind of, we have like, we always like to leave with like a little bit of a call to action. I mean, I think it's sort of challenging because I feel like, you know, that college access organizations and schools have done a lot more to be thinking about parents as part of the equation. But I think there's still really a resource that really hasn't been tapped nearly as much, and really seeing them as active partners is that parents can be the best advocates both for their own students, but also to make sure that as we're having change, it's not being done student by student, but we're building these networks and these common understandings that span across the community. And so as you're thinking, I hope as you guys have been listening to this, as you're thinking about this, that you started thinking about, how can we be using parents as partners in the work that we're doing now? And with that, I will turn it back to Valerie, who will tell us more about the work that's happening inside of Enlace right now.
Thank you, Jenny. So it's always so great to hear the presentation, because I pick something new up every time. Earlier, when we were sharing our reflection question, three things that were shared in the chat stood out: parent engagement, mentorship, opportunities for learning outside the classroom. And so as I think about those, they really connect with the pillars that were identified in this report, and really speak to how Enlace as an organization and within our department as an education team, we're really working to meet the moment. You heard Jenny just share, and I've like been ringing the bell on it too. There's such an untapped opportunity in our parents and families. And so how do we ensure that they are always at the table with us? That is something that we are actively trying to do through our parent mentor program. You heard Jenny talk a little bit about the parent leaders for college. We're working to really think about how can we re-engage, reactivate the parent leaders for college initiative in a way that addresses these last 5 years and meets the moment that we're in today. You've heard me say that a few times, but it's so important, because one of the greatest lessons I've been able to learn is that we can't continue to do business as usual. When you are in the work of people are, we carry invisible backpacks, and we have a diverse set of needs, and so we can't take a one size fits all approach across our community. And so how can we really be thoughtful in that engagement, and really honor that we are a trusted voice in the community, that our staff, that our parents, participants, they are also trusted voices in the community. And there's a huge responsibility that we carry in honoring that. One of the things, as we're thinking about where are we now, a lot of our work had to shift in response to the pandemic. Last year, we kind of had to pivot and respond to, the Better FAFSA application. This year, we're responding to a new administration and everything that comes with that. Every day there's a news cycle that's coming out that inevitably impacts not only our work in education, but again, across the board at Enlace in our community. And so leveraging that those trusted relationships that we've been able to build, I really believe that we are in an opportune time to re-engage our partners in more meaningful ways. So as you've heard, we formerly had mesas de trabajo, working tables. We are working actively with our city colleges and other four-year institutions to kind of redefine and have new MOUs with them. We are working with our district and responding to the needs of our schools. We were really instrumental in bridging community in response to all of our new neighbors that the community received. And so I think the most important thing that I would love for everyone just to take away that is that the work continued in spite of transitions, which is a testament to the fact that Enlace at its roots is a convener and will always be a convener. These relationships that we've been really able to strengthen were established long before the Education Collaborative was a dream and became a reality. And again, I think that's just the commitment that folks have to their community and to, ensuring that our students are able to not just survive, but thrive, because they are more than capable of that. And so, how do we continue to challenge and resist these narratives that inevitably are shared about our community in a really healthy and meaningful way? With that, I will pass it back to Jessica.
Thanks, Valerie. And so I think the report was really inspiring for us at To&Through to think about our role in family engagement. And so the newest and latest project that we've been working on that I've been supporting is called Family Stories. And so Family Stories was started by two amazing, brilliant CPS counselors, Alexis and Nakia, who worked with us last summer. And it's a project where I'm currently interviewing parents or guardians of a CPS 12th grader and asking them, what's it like navigating the college choice process? What are some of the concerns, some of the hopes that they have for their child in selecting the college that best fits them? And so those stories are set to be published in early April, so stay on the lookout. The second form of family engagement we've been working on is just continuing to partner with folks at our sister organization, the U Chicago Consortium on Family Playbooks, which is really innovating how to communicate research and data more clearly with parents. And the last one that's been a work in progress is collaborating with local initiative support corporation and quality of life planning. As Valerie mentioned earlier, the quality of life plan was sort of like the heart that started a lot of the sort of community engagement for LVIC. And so we're thinking about how we can leverage data to help improve communities, in other communities. So yeah, I think that is all of the next steps I have for To&Through. Now we're going to jump into our Q&A portion. So again, inviting folks, if you have a question, it can be about anything and everything, to please use the feature below. It has like a box with a question mark on it, so you can submit questions there. But I'll start us off with our first question. So Valerie, Jenny, since the heart of the report was about community engagement, I'm curious to think about what are some of the current major barriers to community engagement in the college access world today? And
That's such a great question. I be super honest, right? Like, our biggest challenges is that we are faced with an incredible amount of fear. The Better FAFSA rolled out last year, and we did a lot of community engagement to really help our families understand, okay, these are the changes, these are the benefits, that are to come with this new application. But then we saw kind of like this, disaster happen with that rollout. And it was really hard because there was just more questions, and everyone, I'm sure, in this room with us didn't have the answers. So we were kind of all in the same boat. As we think about community engagement now, the fear is really palpable. We've had families decline to support their child in filling out their financial aid application because of possible implications for their families. And that's absolutely real. And so when I think about data as a real tool, it's also a bit terrifying to think about what will data look like over the next 4 years in terms of college enrollment and access for students who come from mixed status backgrounds, families. What will it mean for families in Little Village? And in spite of that, I do think there is a real opportunity, though, to engage partners to and for your institutions and the philanthropic community to really rise to meet this challenge of continuing to ensure that our students have access to an affordable post-secondary pathway. So that was a really long answer, but I think it's continuing to meet the moment and acknowledge that it's okay not to know the answers, because we're all looking for, tell me it's going to be okay. But when we don't have the answer, sometimes we just have to be honest with ourselves and with the community and work collectively to figure out, well, how do we resolve that? Jenny, not sure if there's anything you would like to add to that.
No, I think you did a great job of sort of describing like this moment, which is like so much more complicated. I mean, I think just kind of a quick one is I think around college access is just like how we generally organize our efforts for college access. A lot of it is school-based or individual student-based. And I think sort of about everything you're talking about sort of also describes like how so much of the work is really about what's happening inside of communities and how important trust is to make sure that parents are willing and able to engage in a lot of this work. And I think other thing too is like we live in in Chicago, a lot of high school students are not attending schools in their neighborhood, and that's also, I think there are advantages to that, but one of the big complications is that it means that it becomes a lot harder to be engaging parents, for parents to actually feel that like a level of trust may be different if it's something where they see their child going across the city to attend a school, and there good reasons for that, but it also changes that dynamic, and especially in times like this, I think it's a bigger challenge. And so it really means, it sort of points to why organizations like Enlace that actually have that trust, that have that understanding about what the needs and are seen as a valuable resource and why that matters so much.
Brilliant response. We have our first question by Maureen. I'll read it aloud. Way back in the day, I knew undocumented students who were getting through college by taking one course at a time because that was how they could afford to go. Will our data systems be able to track CPS alumni who might take that route to get through college due to fears about revealing their immigration status? That's a hefty one.
Yeah. I mean, I'll sort of talk about this sort of like from a data perspective, and a little bit other stuff. So, I mean, in terms of like the data that CPS has and To&Through has, we know whether or not students are enrolled in college, but we don't know like how many courses they're taking. We have a little bit of information if they're part-time or full-time. So like on that level, we're not able to. But I think I kind of and we also don't know the immigration status of students either. So I think hopefully from that perspective, it's not as clear. But I think one of the good things that's a really important things that's happening right now is the Star Scholar program. And so, because this is for students who have, who are like so much stronger academically, and then they're able to go to city colleges for free. And then that also carries on potentially to four-year colleges. And so there's much more of an opportunity now for undocumented students to be able to go to college where it's not necessarily piecemeal. But I think the data concerns are real, and I worry about how that's popping up, especially in things like having to share information about finances or anything else that may be pointing to it. So I think at this point in time, we don't know how the current climate is going to affect data collection and the data that are available, but I think it's something we have to keep a very close eye on, especially as it seems that there's a lot of critical data that used to be collected through the Department of Ed and its various components that it's unclear what that's going to look like going forward. So I think that means like the importance of like local data, whether it's data that we know about like within schools or within organizations, or in CPS becomes that much more important to understand what's happening for students and to figure out ways to support them.
Yes, very true. And the data gaps are even scary because I feel like it's often used to like estimate what additional supports are needed. But if we have those missing gaps, we don't really know how much additional funding supports like students need because of those that factor. So my last question for on my end is on this stuff. So I know we talk a lot about the report and you guys have already mentioned takeaways and action steps, but I'm curious, like, what do you hope people in the education space take away from this report? If it had to be one thing only. I know.
I think one of the things that kind of comes up a lot, I think it's sort of like I've talked about before, but just how important parents are and how we need to be bringing them in different ways, especially at the high school level. I think it's really, especially as high school students are trying to figure out what they're going to be doing next. I mean, quite often I think we sort of hear like how parent engagement falls off in high school, and there's a whole host of reasons why that matters. But I think it's something where we really need to be bringing in parents as partners and not just being like, you need to, you know, you need to fill out the FAFSA, you need to support out, filling out the college applications, and so it becomes very much of these tasks that we think that parents need to do. We need to see them as they can be the best advocate for their sons and daughters. They can be the ones who are helping them navigate. I think another piece of the puzzle too is that it's hard, especially for first generation college students, to go on to college, and the parents are quite often the people that students turn to when they struggle. And so having the parent be there to support and advocate and know what to do is something else that's really important. So I think just thinking about how do we bring in partner and parents into this process and really making sure that they aren't just seen as like a barrier to overcome. It's like, wait, parents are reluctant to do this and having this blame happening, but really seeing how they can really be supportive and drawing on their understanding of their students in the community to really make them be a part of this process.
I think I'll take that one step further. And it's also like engaging parents early. It's not enough to just engage them junior or senior year, because by that time, there's just a lot of nuances that, many folks don't realize. So, how can we really prepare parents ahead of time? And that's something that we are actively doing at Enlace, again, through our parent mentor program, but also bringing in parents who are part of the pack, the LSC, inviting them into our spaces to really, it's not our space, it's a community space, and really thinking about conversations that can be had. Sure, your child's only in preschool, but what can you do now to help prepare yourself as a parent, your child, and your family for that student to go to college? The other thing that I would take away, especially again in thinking about our high school students, is we need to have them at the table and really understand what are they experiencing. That it was a great question about students, previously having to take one class at a time. Many of our students that are part of our peer mentor program right now are postponing, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna postpone again. Oh, I need to postpone. And part of that is this responsibility to contribute to household income. And so if they pull from that to pay for one class, it's a big, the family feels it. And so, how can we really hear from our students to better support them, and help them to see, help families to see, like, okay, this is what your child is going through. These are some things that we can help prepare them for, but we need to start that, waiting till senior year is too late. It's about relationship building. So I think a takeaway that I would love folks to have is the importance of relationship building, even amongst, here our peers and colleagues. Like, relationship building is so important, and it's so easy in this digital age to kind of look past that and jump on a quick Zoom, and you get used to seeing like this part of people, but human connection is so important. And that has impact on, life outcomes and developmental success. So thank you.
Beautiful. That's such a beautiful like wrap up, like early relationship building with parents, centering on like being inviting them to be a supportive team member in their in their student success. So okay, well with that, I feel like we have 3 minutes left. It'd be a little bit too short to answer one more question. So gave us it. Oh, thank you, Ritson, for sharing Caesar's insight in the chat. So folks, if you guys are still interested and want to hear more, like continue the conversation, join us for the after party that's happening after this Zoom. We're going to be diving into discussion with Zoom breakout groups just to talk about the report in community. So in a second, I think someone's going to drop the link to that in the chat. Thank you, Usher. So I invite everyone in here to join us. Thank you so much, Jenny and Valerie, for your insights. Again, it's so